Trust you're having a wonderful Wednesday evening. You are listening to Soma Fusion Radio with your host, Dr. Katie Kamara, coming to you live from the nation's capital of Washington, D.C. We are broadcasting to you live worldwide this fine evening on Facebook Live, soma-fusion.com, YouTube, and the official somafusionmedia.com website. For those who do not know who I am or what I do outside of this radio show, I am an Australian native whose full-time writes and talks continue to reach a worldwide audience while I continue breaking ground in alternative metaphysical science, thought and research, journalism, public speaking, illustration, and soulful emotional therapy. Professionally, though, I am a psychologist, research scientist, teacher, and practitioner specializing in eco-psychology, cognitive, social, and evolutionary psychology, integrative holistic medicine, metaphysical science, and metapsychoanalysis. I am an advocate of human rights and access to justice, the development of healthy interpersonal relationships, trauma healing, and sovereign empowerment of men and women worldwide, the highest human potential to help people see themselves no longer as victims of any situation or hardships they encounter throughout their lives. Much to discuss on Soma Fusion Radio tonight. I hope you have your pens and paper handy. If you don't, just listen because you can catch the archive of this show later. But first, if you would like to support me and my work, you can make a donation via PayPal, via my website at soma-fusion.com, or at Patreon at patreon.com/SomaFusion. The Soma Fusion Academy, I encourage you to come and join my courses. For more information on the Soma Fusion Academy, you can go to soma-fusion.com, or you can email me with your queries at somafusionacademy@gmail.com. I also want to mention about the upcoming in 2022, about another program that I will be facilitating called Meaningful Conversations with Dr. Katie Kamara. You can join a different kind of conversation, one that welcomes every perspective in a search for deeper spiritual truths that unite us. All are welcome regardless of background or belief. Inspired by similar facilitated groups across the United States as an act of service in our communities, with the goal of creating, with your help, a space for deeper conversation, connection, reflection, and action. Individuals of all ages, backgrounds, and beliefs gather together each week to explore uplifting and sometimes challenging topics, to engage respectfully and civilly in elevated conversations, inquiry, consultation, and mutual learning. We'll be using a short selection of my teachings as a starting point. We hope to grow together and learn from one another as we seek to build bridges of unity and respect for all of humanity. And the kind of topics that we might include are Kindness and Honesty Week, the soul and the scientific method, transformation of society for the next generation, the power of actions and do our choices matter, finding hope in turbulent times, avoiding self-help trap, one God, many faiths, and does empowering women empower everyone? So that's that. I also will mention too another project that I am embarking on with a very good friend of mine, Keith Anthony Blanchett. He has been an outstanding honorable man who's been the loving and welcoming face of Center of Light Spiritual Technologies, or you might know him as the host of the Center of Light Radio and TV. He hails from Memphis, Tennessee. His infectious outlook on life and spiritual practices and teachings, along with his smile and good nature, are legendary. And I do want you to go out there and stomp on his ground and go give him a like and a share and do whatever you can to support him as well. Keith's warmth and impact has made many who search for a guiding light in compassion and understanding feel very much at home. Now, as a person who lives and breathes the same faith, mission, and entrepreneurial spirit as someone who has been working very closely with Keith to develop and grow in business together, we have developed the Center of Light Foundation. It is a non-profit dedicated to helping empowering humans realize their value and self-worth that they can unconditionally offer to humanity. And since 2018, we've been teaching the unheard power of spiritually positive and productive expression through broad and vast spiritual wisdom, healing through performing arts, improvisation, and meditation. This is purely a non-profit organization founded and jointly run by Keith and myself. Keith being a spiritual teacher, healer, and counselor, hailing from Memphis, Tennessee, and who we are both together are both attuned to the needs and desires of many individuals all around the world. Now, the Center of Light Foundation exists to stand up against the spiritually repressed and oppressed, all the while offering the tools and techniques needed to live in a more inclusive and spiritually aligned and just and safe world. Now, we will be using the tools of meditation, self-reflection, creative writing, visual arts, mentorship, spiritual counseling, service, education, and, of course, leadership training, which all have been guided through Keith and myself. The Center of Light Foundation is able to accomplish our mission to help those rebuild their faith in themselves and in humanity and raise their self-esteem to live a life on fire, clarity, and action. Now, I also want to mention too here that I have recently started the Center of Light Technology Fund, as I was devastated to know that Keith had some technical issues regarding his computer. He has a custom-built computer, so all of his work is done mostly to the community at large by pro bono. And I have offered my hand to help him raise money to provide him with a brand new custom-built computer that he uses to spread his light and love to all. Now, if you would like to make a donation so that we can fundraise for this, you can go to gofundme.com/help-center-of-light, or you can go over to the social media and you can find any of the links. Now, we understand that life happens and that not always people can fundraise together, but we do appreciate your help and support by just sharing out the links that we put up for the GoFundMe Technology Fund so that we can raise money to get that computer. Now, I also want to mention again about the Katie Kamara Healing Center in Rakai, Uganda. Myself and the Soma Fusion brand as a whole is a patron and is actively working with the rural community of womanhood empowered in Rakai district of Uganda. Women in the community aptly named the Katie Kamara Healing Center in honor of my work, and we are committed to provide medical services including a small birthing center, holistic healthcare and education to service approximately 1,000 rural women. The Katie Kamara Healing Center is currently being built to enable, sustain and empower a thriving rural community of many women and children who lack the basic resources, skills and education to have the best quality of life that a human could only deserve to have now and for the future generations to come. In time, COVID stabilizing, obviously we're going through a pandemic right now. One could only assume that I will be mobilizing a team of volunteers to travel with me, to stay with me there, to work in the new community. There is always an opportunity for you to be a part of it as a volunteer, contributor or investor. And our goal currently right now is to provide a temporary building currently being sought out to be rented for 12 months in Rakai, Uganda, as the first step to providing security, stability for many women and children who need access immediately to these services, resources, and education sooner rather than later. You can reach out to me with your queries, or if you want to be a part of it, via email at katiekamarahealingcenter@gmail.com. If you would like to contribute, please go to fundly.com/Katie-Kamara-Healing-Center. And right now, I want to welcome everyone to the second show of 2022. And I'm going to at least mention this one last time in case you missed the first show. For those who have wondered where I've gone over the last 9 months, my apologies for disappearing. I've had a lot of trauma recovery. Emotionally, I wasn't ready to do the show, and soul searching to do due to the trauma of intimate partner violence experienced in January 2021. Now, as you may very well know, Soma Fusion as a brand and its radio show hosts are very dedicated, strong supporters of domestic violence and the elimination of violence against women, gender-based violence, intimate partner violence, and human trafficking. And we will continue to advocate for global action to increase awareness and share knowledge and innovations through our shows presented on Soma Fusion Media. And of course, my prolific writes included upcoming courses and more specifically this show. I'm also a very strong advocate of 22 a day veteran suicide awareness, LGBTQA++ and polyam community, and all persons of disability. I will stand up and hold a heart for those who have known rejection, bullying, depression, anxiety, fear, trauma, mocking, belittling, harassment, loneliness, abandonment, and exploitation and abuse of all kinds. I will be on the side of the afflicted, the misunderstood, the marginalized, and the outcast. I will hold a space for the one in the midst of struggle, always and every time. Throughout the year, there will be many things that will help you on your journey to reach out to each and every single one of you. I am dedicated in helping you all to become equipped with the knowledge and skills necessary to create more equitable learning opportunities, increase academic and personal achievement, and build authentic and caring relationships with diverse people, guided by the belief that we should all be ready to embrace, empower, educate, and include all. Increasing knowledge and creating positive learning environments through culturally responsive and equity-based practices is my priority. By encouraging everyone to use their minds in new ways, by consciously enhancing awareness and creativity in the human mind or inner space. Some believe we only use 10% of our mind's potential. I'm going to help you build your consciousness so that you can develop and use the other 90%, thus producing conscious leaders who speak with integrity, lead with authenticity, and hold themselves accountable, who listen with the intent to understand and not just to respond, and do it by being in tune with themselves and the world around them. Above all, my mission is to promote, protect, and advance the interests of scientifically oriented and metaphysical and psychology in research, application, teaching, and the improvement of human welfare. For new listeners who have never listened to Soma Fusion Radio, it comes as no surprise. I am a radio show host who likes to raise awareness and educate to empower others to reach individual potential, mind, body, and soul. Being in the moment can transform even an ordinary circumstance into a profoundly moving experience while living in the moment. But one thing I do love to delve into is hard topics, especially those that are extremely taboo and critically controversial, or extremely academic to those who are involved in their own beliefs. I will explore them with critical, open thinking and express them without judgment and social inclusion of all. But one thing I will never do on my show is express for you to exclusively jump onto my boat of values, beliefs, or ideologies, but share them with you as a process of diverse learning as a unified, harmonious community. With that said, I encourage each and every one of you listeners out there who are listening to join our conversation on the live streams on Facebook and YouTube, and please be reminded of this. You don't have to believe anything I say on this show, and most important thing for you to do is to research and learn for yourself with a curious, open mind. Now, tonight's topic is exclusively a topic close to my heart, and like many topics are close to my heart, and one that I have done before. If you go over to the YouTube channel, you will find the archives up there. But however, those archives were specifically concentrated on spousal relationships. Now, tonight I'm going to be talking about grandiose toxicity and how toxicity exists on a very broad spectrum. People who are engaged in few of these behaviors in certain circumstances are not always malignant predators. However, if someone engages in these behaviors chronically with the intent to harm and with little to no admission of their own wrongdoing, there's a very high chance that you're dealing with a highly manipulative and toxic individual. Now, tonight I'm going to be looking at toxicity that exists on a very broad spectrum, and we're going into social psychology, where we see very big examples of grandiose toxicity and how people from a very, very early age, from childhood right up to adulthood and in many facets of life, and that includes places like school, during our upbringing, workplaces, politics, anything you could possibly think of that happens in or can be exhibited in society. Now, with that said, you are listening to Soma Fusion Radio with your host, Dr. Katie Kamara, on Soma Fusion Media. For more info, please look me up on social media or go to my website, soma-fusion.com or somafusionmedia.com. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe out this show, and let the whole world know what we're learning each week. Invite them to listen with us. And so after the break, we're going to delve deep and look and examine what grandiose toxicity really is all about.
I ain't gonna stop. I ain't gonna stop.
I'm the only lady here, still the realest nigga in the room. I break the internet top 2 and I ain't number 2. My body, my ice, my cash, all real, I'm a triple threat. Fuck it up and then leave, come back, fuck it up and leave again. Top of the coupe and it look like Freaknik. In the hood hollering free me. Too deep, it's just me and Jay, just both and in them cold sausage. Woo! I like holla. Woo! I might roll her. If they're trying to party with the queen, they gon' have to sign a non-disclosure. I took the top off the Maybach. 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 Hey, I took the top off of my Maybach, bitch. I took the top off of my Maybach, bitch.
I took the top off the Maybach. 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 Ooh, 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 it's glittery, ooh, ooh. Spicy, ooh, ooh, 1.5, ooh, ooh, a hyphy, I see the popo behind me, woo, ain't gon' stop. I see the popo behind me, ain't gon' stop. I see the popo behind me, ain't gon' stop. I take the top of the Maybach, fuck these cops.
We the best music.
I to the top off, I to the top off, I to the top off, I to the top off.
Rock Nation.
I to the top off, I to the top off, I to the top off, I to the top off.
And welcome back to Soma Fusion Radio with your host, Dr. Katie Kamara on Soma Fusion Media. We are tonight talking about Grandiose Toxicity, and those two songs there were a perfect example of Grandiose Toxicity. Narcissist, asshole, or a jerk are some of the words that are used interchangeably, but others tend to disagree. In general, a narcissist has an outsized need to be admired and a sense of entitlement and constant thoughts about being better than others, whether that means being more successful or more loved. The overarching expression of this type of personality is an obsession with self that prevents intimacy with others. And while it's unclear if narcissism is on the rise, what has increased are outlets where narcissistic personality traits can be put on display and completely celebrated. From TikTok to Instagram to reality TV, these mediums brought narcissism into our lives and homes with an increased frequency and intensity. Narcissists fall into two broad categories: grandiose and vulnerable. A third category, narcissistic personality disorder, is an actual mental health disorder. And all share a couple of traits such as self-centeredness and an exaggerated sense of self-importance. But within each type are some important differences. Take a sense of, I'm better than you. And add in ambition, charisma, and charm, and you get a grandiose narcissist. Like Tony Stark from Iron Man. They're sometimes likable, like a politician or a celebrity, and people look up to them, so they don't have to be mean all the time. A grandiose narcissist has high self-esteem, a tendency to overestimate their abilities, and a habit of trying to manipulate or control others. And they'll push forth positive illusions about themselves while simultaneously trying to suppress any info that puts them in an unflattering light. And some studies have shown that a grandiose narcissist can also be either adaptive or maladaptive, depending on which traits they display the most. Adaptive narcissists build up their self-esteem as a way to protect themselves from being hurt by others. These individuals tend to be more successful in life than the majority of the population because they strive to be more attractive, healthier, and more successful versions of themselves. They can also be friendly, warm, persuasive, and have real leadership qualities. One study has found that adaptive narcissists were also more likely to be politicians. But maladaptive narcissists don't have such sunny intentions. They're willing to exploit others so that they can get ahead, and they feel entitled to do so. But let's for a second look at vulnerable narcissism. Unlike a grandiose narcissist, a vulnerable narcissist isn't the life or the leader of the party. They're more likely to be standing in the corner sipping a drink, irritated that no one's paying attention to them. Vulnerable narcissists are insecure, introverted, and have low self-esteem. Someone who thinks that they deserve special treatment but isn't aggressive in getting their needs met. Although they fantasize about success and want other people to admire them so they feel better about themselves, vulnerable narcissists are passive and withdrawn, which makes reaching their goals a tough sell. The subject of narcissism has intrigued people for centuries, but social scientists now claim that it has become a modern epidemic. And so what is it that has led to its increase, and is there anything that we can do about it? But to do that, when we investigate it, we need to look at the very beginning. The term narcissism originated more than 2,000 years ago, when Ovid wrote The Legend of Narcissus. He tells the story of a beautiful Greek hunter who one day happens to see his reflection in a pool of water and falls in love with it. He then becomes obsessed with its beauty and is unable to leave his reflected image until he dies. After his death, the flower of Narcissus grew where he lay. The concept of narcissism was popularized by the psychoanalyst Sigmund Freud through his work on the ego and its relationship to the outside world. And this work became the starting point for many others developing theories on narcissism. But when does it really become a problem? Narcissism lies on a continuum from healthy to pathological. Healthy narcissism is a part of normal human functioning. It can represent healthy self-love and confidence that is based on real achievement, the ability to overcome setbacks and derive the support needed from social ties. But narcissism becomes a problem when the individual becomes preoccupied with the self, needing excessive admiration and approval from others while showing disregard for other people's insensitivities. If the narcissist does not receive the attention desired, substance abuse and major depressive disorders can develop. Narcissists often portray an image of grandiosity or overconfidence to the world. But this is only to cover up deep feelings of insecurity and a fragile self-esteem that is easily bruised by the slightest of criticism. And because of these traits, narcissists find themselves in shallow relationships that only serve to satisfy their constant need for attention. When narcissistic traits become so pronounced that they lead to impairment, this can indicate the presence of narcissistic personality disorder. The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders describes narcissistic personality disorder as a pervasive pattern of grandiosity, need for admiration, and lack of empathy that begins by early adulthood and is present in a variety of contexts. People with narcissistic personality disorder show a grandiose sense of self-importance and are consumed by fantasies of unlimited success, power and brilliance, beauty or ideal love, and are extremely sensitive to criticism, among others. Younger people and men seem to be most affected. The exact causes of narcissistic personality disorder are completely unknown, but childhood abuse and neglect may be possible factors involved in its formation. But what's led to its increase is in the clinical setting, about 2% to 16% of people suffer from this disorder. And while in the general population, less than 1% of people are affected. Some suggest that narcissistic personality disorder is quite rare, but study estimate varies widely depending on sample sizes and the ways that narcissistic traits are assessed. And others have labeled narcissism as a modern epidemic. pointing to the rapid change in society that occurred in the industrial and post-industrial times as the cause. The past few decades have witnessed a societal shift from a commitment to the collective focus to a focus on the individual or the self. The self-esteem movement was an important turning point in this. It determined that self-esteem was the key to success in life. Educators and parents started telling their children how special and unique they are to make them feel more confident. Parents tried to confer self-esteem upon their children rather than letting them achieve through hard work. The rise of individualism, with its focus on the self and inner feelings, and decline in social norms that accompanied the most modernization of society, also meant that community and the family were no longer able to provide the same support for individuals as it once did. And research has shown countless times that being embedded in social networks, for example, being actively engaged in your community and connected with friends and family, has major health benefits. As the social fabric deteriorated, it became much, much harder to meet the basic need for meaningful connection. The question moved from what is best for other people and the family to what is best for me. The modernization of society seemed to prize fame, wealth, celebrity above all else, and all this, combined with the breakdown in social ties, created an empty self shorn of social meaning. The rise of technology and the development of hugely popular social networking sites such as Facebook further changed the way we spend our free time and communicate. And today there are nearly 936 million active Facebook users each day worldwide. Internet addiction is the new area of study in mental health, and recent cross-sectional research shows that addiction to Facebook is strongly linked to narcissistic behavior and low self-esteem. But why are we so obsessed with self-obsession? Ronnie Briggs once said, "No one is innocent." In language that mirrors dialogue from The Walking Dead, we decry destructive rise of narcissism. We write self-help books on how to identify, avoid, manage, and escape the narcissists among us. We refine our diagnostic standards for narcissism, and we study our navel-gazing young people. We re-diagnose past dictators, mass murderers, and influential leaders through newly polished lens of narcissism. We talk about our whole culture as a kind of a petri dish in which narcissists happily grow, and in which the rest of us who are not infected are at a constant risk of harm. Narcissism is the current favored scapegoat for our interpersonal and social ills. And there can be little doubt that narcissism, as we have defined it, is on the increase and has been for some decades. A search of everything from song lyrics to peer-reviewed journal articles show both an increasingly self-focused social and individual psychology and an exponential interest in how to manage this newfound pathology. But our interest has an edge, and often emerging as a kind of punitive diagnostic quarantining of those among us who cannot see past themselves, or a sweeping dismissal of everything from social media to our grooming habits in the interest of promoting a more empathetic society. And here we are, pointing our fingers at the narcissists out there, encouraging the rest of us to limit their supplies and the right to individualistic culture that spawns them. They are the zombies. We are the people. But even as we try to set ourselves apart from Generation me, our finger pointing gives our own self-centeredness and perfectionism away. And the more we describe narcissism as a blight caused by others more traumatized or more spoilt than we are, the more we expose our own narcissistic desires to be perfect, to be above and separate from culture. In other words, we, the critics of the rise of malignant self-love, also see ourselves as inherently special, unable to bear our connection with those whose narcissism overtakes them, and we respond with revulsion and disconnection, reinforcing their separateness and specialness, and our own. But let me give you an example. Your mother might tell you a story of your first day at school, and it might go like this. All the other kids were crying and hanging on to their mother's legs, she says. But you looked up at me and asked, when are you going? Now at 5, you already learnt not to ask for support that couldn't be offered. I already learnt to depend only on myself. This manufactured a fantasy of independence. Far from making me strong, it gave me an unholy fascination with people who seemed able to bask in the attentions of others. To put it in popular, blunted self-help terms, you are primed for a lifetime of relationships with narcissists. Sorry to say that. And it would be easy for me to say at this level of analysis, as many self-help books and articles now do, to leave my self-reflection at the comfortable point of seeing myself as a kind victim of survivor of a personal and social culture of narcissism. But the truth is murkier than I believe. In my past attachments to people with high levels of grandiosity, I was also able to comfortably sidestep my own. And I never had to feel my own narcissism while it was being so expertly acted out around me. I could simply point my finger, as many of us do now, and there it was for all to see, but not, of course, in me. And my past history may also be a part of the reason that I chose a profession that has in some ways contributed to the rise of personal and cultural narcissism. Many therapists sign on in some way to a myth of individual improvement and repair, to individual happiness, to restitution and prosperity, when the weight of the research into the causes of mental ill health point overwhelmingly to the cyclical influence of social determinants, particularly poverty. We work with people most commonly within a framework that denies their social nesting and the very powerful forces that influence their health and their well-being. This truly is narcissism, peddling the idea that everything has been broken, can be mended, happiness is at our fingertips, and we have the power to become whole again and return to our original perfection. This is exactly what Narcissus was looking for in that small crystal pool. Instead of helping to heal the wounds of narcissistic isolation and harm, our self-righteous diagnosing of toxic and self-involvement is perpetuating the individualism inherent in our self-obsessed culture. And as we work over time to set ourselves apart from the scourge of this ugly self-idolatry, we reinforce the collective narcissistic delusion from which we all must in some way be suffering. No one is separate from culture. All of us have our zombie elements, our rotten parts. We are all infected, I'm sorry to say. We are all infected by it. If we really want to have an impact on the inherent individualism and isolation of narcissism, we need to avoid at all costs the sweet, sweet temptation of seeing ourselves as special. So now you're probably sitting here and wondering, oh, I may have got an entire show about, looking at the usual common norms about grandiose toxicity or narcissistic men or women who might be in abusive relationships. Think again, because we got to really look at the core of what narcissism really is about. Right from when we are born, we are not only susceptible to narcissism, but we also can become susceptible to become narcissists ourselves. And so, when we have a different perspective on how we view our behaviors, our thoughts, and the way that we do things in society as a collective, we can really start to pinpoint on our own traits to change them and grow and evolve. Now, you might be sitting here going, wow, she that's too much truth for me to handle. I'm not here to sugarcoat anything for you. I'm here so that I can teach you to become aware that there are different points of view out there. Mine is not the only one. I'm not special to my own information that I put out there unto myself. It is there for you to learn, grow, and evolve. But going back to what I was talking about, we need to look at children and why some children think they're more special than everyone else. Narcissistic children feel superior to others, and they believe that they are entitled to privileges, and they crave admiration from others. When they don't get the admiration they want, they may lash out aggressively. You might see this as a tantrum, or just being a tween, or just being a teenager. I'm special and more special than anyone else. Narcissism is well known for the narcissistic personality disorder, and this is why I'm trying to give you a different version here. But narcissism itself is not a disorder. It's a normal personality trait that varies between individuals. Remember that. And it can be measured by self-report questions such as, I am a great example for other kids to follow. And other kids, like me, deserve something extra. Narcissism can be measured in children as young as 7 years old, the age at which they can form global self-evaluations and readily compare themselves to others. Again, I'm special and more special than everyone else. And the question that has preoccupied psychologists for more than a century now is, why do some children feel or become narcissistic? What leads them to feel more special than everyone else? And some psychologists argue that narcissism is fostered by a lack of parental warmth. Children may put themselves on a pedestal in an attempt to fill the emotional void. And other psychologists out there will argue that narcissism is fostered by a parental over-evaluation. Parents seeing their child as an embryonic genius or as God's gift to humanity. Children may internalize these views to form inflated narcissistic views of themselves. But let me tell you something. In new research published in the Proceedings of a National Academy of Sciences, we put these perspectives to the test. In 4 6-monthly measurements, they tracked parents' over-evaluation and warmth levels and children's narcissism and self-esteem levels. Contrary to the common belief that narcissists don't always have high self-esteem, although that they believe that they are better than others, they aren't necessarily satisfied with who they are. And it's been found that narcissism and self-esteem have remarkably distinct origins. When children were overvalued by their parents, they developed higher levels of narcissism. Being overvalued, although seemingly benign, may convey to children that they are superior individuals who are entitled to privileges. But when children felt warmth and affection from their parents, they developed higher levels of self-esteem, a healthy feeling of being satisfied with oneself without seeing oneself as superior. And the findings weren't just due to overvaluing parents being narcissistic themselves. Regardless of the parents' own narcissism levels, or how much they overvalued their child, predicted the child's narcissism levels 6 months later. But if we look at raising self-esteem without breeding narcissism, socialization isn't the sole origin of narcissism. Narcissism is moderately to largely inheritable. And findings suggest that above and beyond its inheritable basis, narcissism can be shaped by socialization experiences. And this may pave the way for interventions to curtail narcissism at a very, very early age. Since the 1980s, when the self-esteem movement emerged, we as a society have become increasingly concerned with raising children's self-esteem. That's a good thing. A good dose of self-esteem protects children against anxiety and depression, for example. But in the attempts to raise self-esteem, we often inadvertently rely on overvaluing practices. Lavishing our children with praise and telling them that they are extraordinary individuals. And research suggests a more effective approach just by simply showing warmth and affection to your children, but not telling them that they are better or more deserving than all of their other friends or classmates. But what about narcissistic leaders? And even children fall for their superficial charms. And of course, we live in an age of narcissistic leadership. All around the world, we are witnessing the rise and fall of narcissistic leaders. People who hold grandiose views of themselves, who believe laws and regulations don't apply to them, and who crave the respect and admiration of their followers. But let me pose a question here. Could narcissistic leadership have roots in childhood? And as a psychoanalyst, I set out to investigate that hypothesis for this show. Remember, narcissism is a personality trait that is characterized by an inflated sense of self-importance and entitlement. And as a psychoanalyst, there is much research that narcissism develops in childhood. from the age of 7, but there are subtle and stable differences between the children and their levels of narcissism. As adults, narcissists often emerge as leaders in groups because narcissists captivate others with their alluring charm, bold vision, and unshakable self-confidence. And given that children would spend most of their free time at school in groups, it's often wondered whether narcissistic children would be seen as leaders by their peers. Maybe perhaps as the playground's president or prime minister or king of the hill. In a study that I came across, they recruited a sample of 332 children between the ages of 7 and 14. They assessed them for narcissism levels and then asked the children to write down the names of classmates who they perceived as a true leader. And they explained that a leader is someone who decides what a group does, someone who's boss. Narcissistic children were often seen by their classmates as true leaders. The association between narcissism and leadership was so consistent that it emerged in 96% of all classrooms that this study investigated. And so now we know that narcissistic children often emerge as leaders in their classrooms. But the question here is, do they actually excel as leaders? And to address this question, the study invited children to perform a collaborative task. They formed a 3-person committee to select the best police officer from several candidates. They received a detailed descriptions of each candidate with attributes such as likes helping other people, is good at karate, is afraid of the dark. And the task was designed so that children could only identify the best candidate when they were shared the information about the candidates with their group members. It's key to note here that collaboration was the point of this exercise. And the study randomly assigned one child to be the leader. This child sat at the head of the table and was responsible for guiding the group discussion and making the final decision. Despite having positive perceptions of their own leadership skills, narcissistic children do not excel as leaders. Compared to other leaders, they did not show better leadership. They did not guide their groups to better performance. They were perfectly average. If narcissistic children didn't actually excel as leaders, why did their classmates still see them as true leaders? Children, like adults, may take the big talk of narcissistic individuals at face value. And indeed, people are often unable to look through the narcissistic facade, mistaking confidence for competence. And this might actually help us understand what drives people to choose narcissists to lead them, but it doesn't mean that adult narcissistic leaders should be compared to children. Maybe perhaps as an example, it is concerning that former US President Donald Trump was at various points described as a toddler in chief, an insecure, boasting little boy, and a spoiled 5-year-old throwing a tantrum. That's not only unfair to toddlers, but it also legitimizes Trump's behavior while in office. An adult can be considered accountable for inciting violence and undermining democracy. A toddler can't. Remember that. In 1931, Sigmund Freud wrote that narcissists impress others as personalities and are well suited to take on the role of leaders. But studies have shown, however, that narcissists excel at impressing others, not at leading others. And as a society, we should be more careful about selecting our leaders based on their competence rather than their confidence. But going back to what I was originally talking about, just because you think that your child is extraordinary doesn't mean that they are. It is only natural for parents to value their child, and feeling valued is key to children's well-being. But some parents overvalue their child, believing their child is more special and more entitled than others. The idea of parental overvaluation was first introduced in psychology by Sigmund Freud, who saw it as a revival and reproduction of parents' own narcissism. Parents who overvalue their child, Freud argued, were under a compulsion to ascribe every perfection to the child, which sober observation would find no occasion to do. So, empirical research on parental overvaluation has been scarce. Some that I've found. But in an article published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, let's examine this further. 6 studies involving more than 1,700 Dutch and American parents. They developed a concise self-reporting instrument to assess individual differences in parental overvaluation, something called the POS, Parental Overvaluation Scale. In the scale, parents rate their agreement with statements such as, "My child deserves special treatment," and "My child is a great example for other children to follow." Now, of course, the scale yields an average score in the range from not at all overvaluing to extremely overvaluing. And they found that there are important differences between parents in showing how strongly they overvalue their child, and that these differences shape parents' thoughts and behaviors. And to give you an idea of how they describe it, let me tell you the tale of Benson Bunny. Given that overvaluing parents see their child as embryonic geniuses, as the neo-Freudian psychoanalyst Karen Honey puts it, they might overestimate their child's capacities. And looking at it actually confirms this prediction. In the study, they asked parents to rate their child's smartness, and then they assessed the child's actual IQ. Parental overvaluation predicted how smart parents thought that their children were, but not how smart the child actually was. And in another study, they presented parents with items that children should be familiar with by the end of their first year of secondary school, such as Neil Armstrong and the book Animal Farm. For each of those topics, they asked parents whether they thought their child would be familiar with it. Unbeknown to the parents, they also included items that did not actually exist, such as Queen Alberta and the tale of Benson Bunny. Overvaluing parents tended to claim that their child had knowledge of many different topics, including these non-existent ones. So what's in a name? Overvaluation shapes not only how parents think about their child, but also how they treat and raise their child. Overvaluing parents want their child to stand out from the crowd. And one way to accomplish this is by giving children a unique, uncommon first name. And to test this, studies have used a national database to obtain the proportion of children who were the same sex and born in the same year as the children in the study. And they found that overvaluing parents were indeed more likely to give their child an uncommon first name. When parents overvalue their child, they might want to express their inflated views of their child. One means to do so by heaping praise onto that child. And studies have conducted in-home observations and have counted how often parents praised their child while the child was doing mathematics or just their homework in general. And they found that overvaluing parents praise their child 62% more than parents who had less inflated views of their child. Although a large majority of parents might believe that praise is invariably beneficial to children, research suggests otherwise. And the previous work by Carol Dweck shows that praise, if focused on the person, for example, "you're great," or phrased in an overly positive way, for example, "you made an incredibly beautiful drawing," can, in fact, ironically backfire, especially in children with low self-esteem. But are we looking at reality or fiction? Are overvalued children different from other children? Are they somehow more extraordinary or special than others? My opinion, they're not. And I've found that overvalued children are not smarter or better performing than other children, nor do they differ in basic temperamental traits. So the justification for overvaluing your child seems to reside more in the parents' minds than the objective reality. But remember, not all parents are equally inclined to overvalue. And it's been found that narcissistic parents who believe that they are superior to others and who want to be admired by others are especially inclined towards it. But why is this possible? I can tell you that one possibility is that narcissistic parents are trying to put themselves on a pedestal. Because parents often see their child as part of themselves. Admiring their child may also be an indirect way of admiring themselves. Another possibility is that narcissistic parents simply believe that the child has inherited their wonderful qualities. Now, each of you listeners out there who are listening right now going, "Oh no," who's guilty of actually saying that? I know I am. But so much like Narcissus, the original story from 2,000 years ago, admired his own image in the water, narcissistic parents often admire their own image of flesh and blood. And what does that equate to? Your child. Again, this show is not about pointing the finger at you. It is to get you to understand where these characteristics and traits that we inherently are brought up with, that we actually do project a lot of our ideologies, our isms, and our beliefs onto the very children that we give birth to. And then later on down the track, we point the finger at these very children who have been brought up in these environments to think, feel, and behave the way that they're behaving, and take no responsibility for making or having an influence on that said behavior. Again, this show is all about education. And hopefully you might take away a few things from this show and learn something about yourself that you didn't know, that you were either doing in a toxic way, to stop repeating patterns that keep going on over and over again. And it's nice to have someone bluntly be honest and give you honest information about how things really are. Because if we don't have an honest clue about the world around us, and we continue justifying everything, we would never progress as a society. I'm not here to sugarcoat anything for you. Just offer you a completely different perspective. One that's perhaps not been taught to you. So with that said, we are going to take a break. You are listening to Soma Fusion Radio with your host, Dr. Katie Kamara, on Soma Fusion Media. And when we come back, we're going to be talking about how narcissists are none other than human.
Out of touch with my feelings, I can't help it if I'm happy or sad. Today I cried for no reason, made me feel like a psychopath. I should hate you cause I love you. You should hate yourself for treating me like that. We both know you only love you. Did you know they have a name for that? You say that I'm crazy, you say that you're sorry, won't happen again. You say I'm dramatic, I'm overreacting, and maybe I am. And I know you'll get over me, but can you get over yourself before you go and love somebody else? You should probably get some help. My parents don't like you, why would they want to? After they found me crying on the bathroom floor, I don't even like me anymore. Cause you say that I'm crazy, you say that you're sorry, it won't happen again. You say I'm dramatic, I'm overreacting, and maybe I am. And I know you'll get over me, but can you get over yourself before you go and love somebody else? You should probably get some help. You lose your voice when you yell too much. Don't say you love me until you mess up. Phone calls past 12 o'clock wanting me back. Don't you know that they got a name for that? You say that I'm crazy, you say that you're sorry, won't happen again. You say I'm dramatic, I'm overreacting, and maybe I am. And I know you'll get over me, but can you get over yourself before you go and love somebody else? You should probably get some help.
You wanna know what to say? Narcissist, better watch yourself. You wanna know what to say? The narcissist, you better watch yourself. You better watch yourself. it down. The mouth flows on wax, and your artillery lead. Do you like our bad? Do you like our bad? Deep sex, 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 deep. Deep sex, 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 sexy damn. Yeah. It's like a stranger at a key came inside my mind and moved all my things around. He didn't know snakes can't neither prey, can't try to break my psyche down. The mouth flows on wax, and your arms are in lead. Do you like our bad? Do you like our bad? Yeah. The mouth flows on wax, and your arms are in lead. Do you like our bad? Do you like our bad? Deep sex, 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 sexy deep. Deep sex, 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 sexy deep. You wanna know what Zeus said? Narcissist, you better watch yourself. Wanna know what Zeus said? Narcissist, you better watch yourself. You better watch yourself. Better watch yourself. Love is evil, God is confidence, heroes of soul, citizens here. Love is evil, God is confidence, heroes of soul, citizens here. Love is evil, God is confidence, heroes of soul, citizens here. Love is evil, God is confidence, heroes of soul, citizens here. Citizens here. Citizens here. Deep sex, 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 sexy deep. Deep sex, 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 sexy deep. Wanna know what Zeus said to narcissist? You better watch yourself. You wanna know what Zeus said to narcissist? You better watch yourself.
And we are back. You are listening to Soma Fusion Radio with your host, Dr. Katie Kamara, on Soma Fusion Media. And before the break, we were talking about how children and in their upbringing, without us parents realizing or not, can actually negatively influence narcissistic traits on them to actually bring them up in an environment that later influences their adulthood. Now we're going to move on to how research or studies discovers that narcissists are only human. Now we understand that words are powerful things, and the words we use to classify and pathologize can be very, very powerfully negative. And this is something that I've argued here and there before. Unfortunately, psychologists use prerogative and scientifically inaccurate language too, even when they are conducting positive and life-affirming research. And a recent example of this was the announcement that narcissists are able to feel empathy. Now, this was based on a study published in the Personality and Social Psychology Bulletin. The title of the paper asks, "Can narcissists be empathetic?" and concludes that narcissists can be moved by another's suffering if they take that person's perspective. Now let's think a little. Narcissism is a term, a psychological term, which refers to extreme selfishness, a grandiose view of one's own talents, and a craving for admiration. And, of course, self-centeredness. This is a trait that we all inherently share. Don't get me wrong here. Don't marginalize what narcissism is really about. It's a trait. Yet there's a tendency to refine it into a diagnosis, something I wholly disagree with as a psychologist. We all have a tendency, greater or less, to be selfish, and I don't see it as helpful to discuss narcissism and narcissists in diagnostic terms. Now, these researchers I come across, they had focused on individuals with subclinical narcissism, rather than actual people with a clinical diagnosis of narcissistic personality disorder, which is something different altogether. Because people high in subclinical narcissism are psychologically healthy and well-adjusted, often even very successful, whereas people with NPD or narcissistic personality disorder are inflexible and volatile, and they don't manage their day-to-day life very well. But this kind of use of language nevertheless distorts and perverts our thinking. And this particular research is quite interesting and very benign. But it comes across with this kind of language as if there are certain types of people walking secretly among us, called narcissists. And we immediately have a negative response, made worse by the implication that these narcissists lack empathy. And these researchers, ever so delicately, in discussing subclinical narcissism, in my opinion, merely serves to reinforce the idea that such distinctions and the very conclusions made about people on the basis of such distinctions are very valid. But here's the prevalent myth: that we should be really scared of people with a diagnosed mental illness because of a lack of empathy. Perhaps it would make more sense and be a little bit less alarming if we didn't say narcissists lack empathy, and instead said people who tend to think about themselves rather more than the average tend to think about other people somewhat less than the average. Or even, we'd all be better off if we thought about others a little more. And I think it would be less misleading and much less stigmatizing, but that's also less headline grabbing than the alternative. On a similar note, I think it's also worth considering this second element of the research. Again, you can look it up. The title of the paper is called "Can Narcissists Be Empathetic?" It was published in Personality and Social Psychology Bulletin. So if you can Google that, you can go have a look at the study. And it reported that individuals high in narcissism are capable of reporting higher empathy if instructed to take that person's perspective. Now, clearly, to the average mind, this is good news. But again, I think we should be very careful, and very careful indeed, with the language that we use. If read incorrectly, bearing in mind the paper's title, this finding could be seen as suggesting that there are certain people out there with a pathology called narcissism that renders them incapable of empathy. But unfortunately, we've found a way of making them care more about other people, and I don't think it's quite like that. And while it's pretty obvious that selfishness is likely to be associated with antisocial behavior, and empathy protects us against hurting other people, it is not helpful to suggest that crime can be accounted for this as the symptom of some form of narcissistic mental disorder. And rather than framing this research around narcissism, it could be something more along the lines that people who tend to think about themselves rather more than the average do so, unless they are prompted to take the other person's point of view. Which, don't get me wrong, this is good news. It's good to think about the way in which we all, me included, can be self-centered, lacking in compassion, lacking in empathy, and the simple fact that simple psychological interventions, so reminding ourselves to take the other person's point of view, can increase that compassion, is also obviously good. It's particularly important to note that this is a very simple psychological cue. We're not really correcting a brain abnormality here. We use language inappropriately when we label ordinary social and psychological phenomena such as disorders and pathologies. And my opinion, we need to stop. And I get it. There are a lot of people that have suffered from trauma of the abuse of narcissism. But let me put it straight to you. Don't let your perception be clouded over by the trauma that you've experienced. Learn, grow, and evolve. This is all about creating awareness. But what about if we skip to narcissism on social media? Do you know that narcissism on social media tells us a lot about ourselves? And there's an increasing number of studies into the correlation between social media and narcissistic tendencies. And that confirms what many of us already suspect. We see teenagers spending hour after hour with their phones looking at Facebook. Now, I know I'm singling out Facebook, but Facebook seems to be the most popular one that everybody seems to be on. And they are consumed with how they present themselves online and how others respond to their profiles. Read about self-obsessed celebrities promoting themselves on Twitter, even when they appear to be in the midst of a nervous breakdown. Narcissism on social media runs across the spectrum of users. But it's interesting to see how the correlation varies between different sites. And I will say that in a study that I came across, they conducted users of Facebook and Twitter, and it was published in Computers in Human Behavior. And they wanted to understand how social media reflected or amplified narcissism. And they measured this by asking different questions about usage and personality assessments that revealed very different narcissistic traits such as exhibitionism, superiority, and authority. And they also found some young adult university students who had scored higher in certain types of narcissism posted more often on Twitter. But those with narcissistic tendencies in the middle-aged adults from the general population tended to post more frequently on Facebook. And they concluded that those in the middle age category had usually already formed their social selves, and they used Facebook to gain approval from their peers, whereas narcissistic university students used Twitter to broadcast views to a broader social circle. Share and share alike. Now, don't get conflicted between what people do as a business as opposed to what you do personally. However, it is all relevant. Studies also suggest a link between the amount of time we spend on Facebook and the likelihood of showing narcissistic traits, in particular, exhibitionism. However, the frequency with which users post status updates is a better predictor and also a less simplistic measure. And if we begin to dig deeper, if posting frequency is linked to narcissistic traits, then it's important to determine whether this applies to any kind of posting, like linking to a news story, or only postings relating to one's own thoughts, feelings, and accomplishments. Future research would also determine whether narcissists differ from others in their expectations of how others respond to their posts. For example, for those who receive many comments or likes on a picture or a status update, frequent posting can be a means of conversation. Now, if you're a narcissist, how does it affect you if you post but don't receive any feedback? Research recently carried out at Penn State University also suggests that how we behave in social media reflects our levels of self-esteem. Participants were asked questions about the types of personal data that they included on their personal profiles, how often they changed and updated information, and how they saw their self-worth. And from this, the researchers suggest that users with lower self-esteem continuously monitor their walls and delete unwanted posts from their users. From a practical perspective, these researchers suggest that app developers could develop ways of customizing walls and profile pages to tap into these concerns. But I also should note that social media use has developed over the years. So there's a risk in this type of research producing fragments of evidence that doesn't add up to anything meaningful. And the more specific a measure is measuring Facebook pokes, for instance, and apparently as of yesterday that is still a thing, the more likely the practice that is being measured is to fall out of use, and leading research to become inscrutable to future readers. And let me just ask you guys a question out there. Back when poking was all the rage, what did that exactly mean, to poke somebody? I'll leave you with that question. Maybe perhaps you can give me some feedback on that. But instead, we need to consider the bigger picture by analyzing attributes and behaviors that stick around long after the latest iteration of the most popular social media site has vanished. And no one may be poking or tweeting 10 years from now. But at least it's a relatively safe bet that people will post information about themselves and their accomplishments with varying frequency and with various expectations about their audience. But some have responded to critiques of social media by likening it to the overblown moral panics over the effect of comic books and television on children. A common defense of social media and media generally is that its use is merely an extension of existing behavior. Teenagers of the yesteryear congregated in parking lots. Today they congregate online. This outlook is productive because it helps us to avoid an irrational bias in favor of face-to-face interaction and against all things digital. However, it fails to acknowledge how certain attributes of online life, immediate gratification, and the expanded audience may fundamentally change how we interact and develop as human beings. Keeping an eye on the relationships between social media use and the psychological traits such as narcissism helps us know whether certain kinds of online socialization strengthen our social fabric, while other kinds divide us further. Now, more than 1 billion people have now gotten Facebook accounts. Some people have multiple accounts. And we know that social media use is associated with desirable things such as increasing social support. But I also want to point out here that it also appears to help those who are shy from meaningful relationships. But we do have to understand the good and the bad, just like everything in life. Research findings of narcissism and social media use should help us fill in some of the missing pieces about how we are developing relationships and interacting in a digital age. We still don't know whether social media itself causes increases in narcissism, if narcissism merely seek out social media, or if both form a kind of vicious cycle. And the rapid widespread adoption of any technology is often met with dual responses of fear and claims of exaggeration. And that is because you can't see the person. They're merely on the other side of the computer. Understanding the limitations of findings and their benefits is the best way to separate knowledge from controversy. You really have to dig deep and discern for yourself. And as I've said many times on this show, you need to discern the information that I give you. I'm not here. All I'm doing is presenting to you. You don't have to believe anything that I say. You may even take this show personal. And the reason why you would take this show personal is because I'm talking about narcissism. It affects each and every single one of us. But my point here again is not to point fingers. It is to allow you to learn about what really goes on in the world so that you can understand it with an open mind. But let me move on. With the obsession of reality TV, could you be a narcissist? When we think of someone as a narcissist, there's always a chance that they have subclinical narcissism. The technical term for a personality trait characterized by grandiosity, entitlement, envy, a tendency to exploit others, and a preoccupation with fame and success. It's not considered pathological. Like the more serious and clinically diagnosable narcissistic personality disorder, it is disconcerting nonetheless. People who develop NPD, narcissistic personality disorder, almost always have the same subclinical narcissistic trait. And in 2008, psychologists were able to show that scores on the Narcissistic Personality Inventory, which measures subclinical narcissism, have been steadily increasing in the United States since the 1970s. A year later, two popular books called The Narcissism Epidemic and The Mirror Effect analyzed the phenomenon, floating potential reasons for the rise of narcissism in America. And they both concluded that the rapid growth and reach of entertainment, media, and celebrity culture shared much of the blame. However, neither of those books tested the claim. And so there have been studies that were conducted on television viewing habits that were designed just to do that. And it's interesting to notice how college students responded to this study. And they were interested in three particular questions. Is narcissism related to television exposure? Are preferences for specific television genres related to narcissism? Are narcissism trends continuing? And for this study, they administered a survey to 565 college students, and they asked them to complete several questionnaires with questions that included how much television they watched and their preferred genres, in addition to narcissistic personality inventory, NPI. And each participant selected which of a pair of statements best describes them, and each pair contained one narcissistic and one non-narcissistic answer, with an individual score determined by the total number of narcissistic options selected. And comparing the results from the sample taken in 2012 with a hypothetical 2006 sample constructed from a prior meta-analysis of narcissism research, they found that their sample of college students had an average NPI score of approximately 1.5 points higher. And this evidence suggests that narcissism among college students is continuing to increase. They have also found that people who watch more television were more likely to score higher on the NPI. However, once they accounted for genre, this correlation diminished and a different one emerged. Regardless of how much TV that they watched, people who liked political talk shows, reality talk shows, sporting events, and horror shows tended to score higher on the NPI. But those who preferred news broadcast, even if they watched a lot of TV, usually had lower scores on the NPI. If taken together, these results suggest that there is a relationship between television exposure and narcissism. Furthermore, the type of show one prefers is more influential than the amount of TV watched. So on the surface, these results make sense. Take horror shows. The villains often exhibit narcissistic personality traits as they profess their grand plans for destruction and domination. Meanwhile, political talk shows like The O'Reilly Factor or Real Time with Bill Maher, sporting events, and in particular reality shows like Keeping Up with the Kardashians, all feature plenty of narcissistic personalities whose viewers might then mimic in their everyday life behavior. Contestants and stars typically brag about their accomplishments. They insult their opponents and demand special treatment before and after and during filming. Meanwhile, a baseball star, after hitting a game-winning home run, might claim he's been blessed. On the other hand, the results for those who prefer news broadcasts corroborate previous studies showing that news consumers are more civically engaged and less individualistic. But as findings come as reality TV series and partisan political shows have proliferated in recent years, in the year 2000, there were already 4 reality television shows. By 2010, that number had ballooned to 320. Meanwhile, some cable news networks today, like Fox News or MSNBC, feature wall-to-wall opinion shows. When viewers are exposed to so many characters and personalities exhibiting narcissistic behavior and being rewarded, they have to reason to model such behaviors themselves. When the Kardashians receive lucrative television contracts, and while golfer Tiger Woods nets massive endorsement deals, and in Donald Trump, we're now seeing a reality TV star being rewarded with Republican presidential nomination, and then becoming the President of the United States. While correlation doesn't mean causation, of course, it's important to remember that this was just a survey or a study rather than a controlled experiment. And therefore, we cannot infer whether television exposure and genre preferences actually make people more narcissistic, or whether people who are more narcissistic are simply more likely to watch certain type of shows. and it's best if we think that the first explanation is more compelling. But I hope future research will be able to better determine the direction of these relationships. But I doubt many people consider these results as a surprise. Estimates of average television exposure now range from 3 to 5 hours a day, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics and Nielsen. It's a reasonable assumption that any leisure activity that occupies about 20 to 30% of the average person's waking hours will have some influence on someone's personality. And that's just traditional viewing in front of a television. The average person will spend even more time consuming television shows on portable devices like laptops and smartphones and tablets. This level of media exposure becomes concerning when the shows feature individuals who model rampant self-interest, disregard of others' well-being, and a focus on the individual above all else. And in my opinion, I think that also partially explains the rise in narcissism since the 1970s. But did you know there's more than one type of narcissist? And do you know what makes each of them tick? Now, chances that you're listening to the show right now, you've either met a narcissist or by guilty conscience are looking internally within yourself and perhaps maybe not labeling yourself as a narcissist, but wondering whether you are a narcissist. Again, I am not pointing fingers. This is purely to raise awareness of what a narcissist is in society. Now, of course, we already know that a narcissist is someone who thinks that they're better than everybody else, dominates the conversation, and of course, above all, loves the limelight. But scientists are increasingly realizing that not all narcissists are the same. Some are, in fact, extremely insecure. And this is where we go on to talk about grandiose narcissists versus the vulnerable narcissists. And in research, there are two types of previously identified narcissism: grandiose and vulnerable. Grandiose narcissists are arrogant, dominant, and extroverted. And they tend to have high self-esteem, be bold and assertive, and feel happy and confident about their lives. Vulnerable narcissists, on the other hand, are withdrawn, neurotic, and insecure. They tend to have low self-esteem, be hypersensitive, and feel anxious and depressed. However, these two types of narcissists also have something in common. Both are selfish, they feel entitled to special treatment and privileges, and relate to others in antagonistic ways. You might be able to recognize the two types of narcissists by how they behave in social situations. Grandiose narcissists are socially competent. They are likely to be dominant and charming. Vulnerable narcissists, on the other hand, are less socially skilled. They are likely to be shy and anxious in social situations. And what's more, while grandiose narcissists are forthright and assertive in pursuing their goals, seeking to maximize success, vulnerable narcissists are timid and defensive, seeking to minimize failure. But in doing this show, my research, I examined the social motives and perceptions of both grandiose and vulnerable narcissists. In particular, I investigated their desires to attain social status and social inclusion. I also looked at whether they felt they had to be successful or had been successful in attaining social status and social inclusion. Social status refers to being respected and admired by others. It involves standing out and being seen as an important person in the social hierarchy. In contrast, social inclusion refers to being liked and accepted by others, and it involves fitting in well with others as a part of the social community. Now, any given person may have or desire both status and inclusion. Only one of the two or neither. For example, in the TV show The Simpsons, the character of Mr. Burns has a high status but is not particularly liked and accepted, whereas the character of Homer Simpson is well liked and accepted but does not have high status. Now, a study was conducted recruiting 676 adults based in the United States and were assessed for their levels of grandiose and vulnerable narcissism. They were also assessed by the extent to which they desired status and inclusion, as well as the extent to which they felt they had attained their goals. And it was found that both grandiose and vulnerable narcissists strongly desired social status. And interestingly, whereas grandiose narcissists felt they were successful in attaining their status, vulnerable narcissists felt that they did not get the status that they deserved. And what's more, grandiose narcissists didn't feel that they attained social inclusion but did not particularly desire it either. In contrast, vulnerable narcissists also did not feel that they had attained social inclusion but strongly desired it. Grandiose narcissists therefore felt that they had met their social goals, but vulnerable narcissists did not. And both types of narcissists crave the respect and admiration of others. But while grandiose narcissists may be the stars on the interpersonal stage, triumphantly capturing the spotlight, their vulnerable counterpart may be a bit of a player lurking on the sidelines, resentfully seeking but failing to obtain the applause that they so crave. But let me move on and talk about the age of collective narcissism. You know, consider, and I'm not to go all political on this, but consider slogans such as "Make America Great Again," used by Donald Trump, or "Take Back Control," used in the Brexit campaign. They suggest that in the US and the UK, the unique position of the nation has somehow been undermined, and that somehow it needs to be restored. Now, both slogans were the perfect pitch to mobilize what are called collective narcissists. These are people who want their group to be constantly recognized by others. They are hypersensitive to any signs that it is not. And the central feature of narcissism is emotional dependence on admiration and recognition by others. When that admiration is sought on behalf of a group, narcissism becomes collective. The two forms of narcissism are not strongly related. However, individual narcissists are not automatically collective narcissists. The term collective narcissism was first used by Theodor Adorno to describe the sentiment that gave support to Nazi rule in Germany in the 1930s. And ongoing research in the UK and the US suggests that people who agreed with statements on collective narcissism were significantly more likely to report that they voted to leave the European Union in the June 2016 referendum in the UK. They also were more likely to report that they voted for Donald Trump in the US presidential election. Now, they did develop a scale that includes such statements, such like, "It really makes me angry when others criticize my group," and "My group deserves special treatment." And in the survey that they did, participants were asked to think about a group that they might belong to, such as a religion or a nationality, when considering these statements. And on the scale, there were questions like, "I wish other groups would more quickly recognize the authority of my group," or "My group deserves special treatment." or I will never be satisfied until my group gets the recognition it deserves. Or if my group had a major say in the world would be a much better place. And not many people seem to fully understand the importance of my group. We should worry when collective narcissists rise to power, because scoring highly on a collective narcissism scale predicts being prejudiced regardless of people's age, gender, or education. Collective narcissists are prejudiced selectively. They reject or attack groups that somehow threaten their group's grandiose image. Collective narcissists also embrace their own bigoted attitudes. They spin and believe in conspiracy theories about the groups that they reject, however fantastic they might be. In studies conducted last year in Poland, Catholic collective narcissists believed that there was a gender conspiracy working against them. They agreed with statements like, gender ideology was created to destroy the Christian tradition. Gender is a threat to Christian morality. And the purpose of gender is to destroy family. And as a result, collective narcissists reject anybody who's presented progressive views about gender roles or sexuality. Collective narcissists also desire revenge on anyone who doesn't sufficiently recognize their group. And in studies, national collective narcissists in the US read a fictional interview with foreign exchange student who didn't like some aspects of their exchange experience. And after reading unfavorable comments about their country, collective narcissists express hostile behavioral intentions towards all compatriots of the exchange student. And the same pattern was repeated when collective narcissists identified themselves as a part of a national group. When their group was criticized or not properly recognized, collective narcissists advocated hostile revenge, ranging from insult to injury. In another study, it is suggested to collective narcissists in Poland that new chemical elements were found and discovered through international collaboration, but not named after their country. In response, they advocated hostile confrontation with those who did not want the elements to be named after their country. But collective narcissists also see insult where no one has seen it before. For example, for a transgression as a petty joke made by a celebrity about their country's government, people in the study threatened physical punishment and engaged in schadenfreude openly, rejoicing in the misfortunes of their offender. So have the collective narcissists really won their plight? There seems to be no limit what collective narcissists can interpret as offensive to their group. Consider intergroup comparisons. In one of the studies that I came across, Portuguese collective narcissists were hostile towards Germans because they thought Germany had higher status and more power in the European Union than Portugal. So another group may be rejected, marginalized, or otherwise punished for being better or even as good as one's own. But all this suggests that arguments such as foreign workers contribute to the national economy or refugees can find jobs and prosper in host countries may not only fail to convince national collective narcissists, but actually threaten and enrage them. Success for another group or empowerment for a minority threatens the majority's privileged position, because collective narcissists want to protect the privileged position of their group by undermining other groups' qualities and motivations. Consider also that for those who seek recognition for their group, the worst offense is for their group to be ignored. According to collective narcissistic logic, such an offense needs to be avenged. And this creates the potential for political antagonism and even violence when groups of this kind feel ignored in political processes. Collective narcissists are more likely to advocate violent revenge for lost grandiosity and gravitate towards similarly minded group members. This is the sentiment that seems to be currently shaping our world. Collective narcissism was mobilized in support for Brexit and Trump. It won. Collective narcissist attitude and reactions were so legitimized in leading democratic countries. The pre-referendum and pre-election rhetoric mobilized collective narcissists' sense of intergroup threat and reactive intergroup hostility. It was irresponsible to mobilize them because we really don't know how to address them constructively. But recent data shows that the self-esteem of individuals within groups of collective narcissists is low and their emotions negative. They avoid interpersonal closeness and are vulnerable to shame. Investing in groups' exaggerated image seems to be their dominant way of fulfilling universal need for positive social connections. And perhaps being involved in democratic processes and institutions can equip collective narcissists with a more constructive and less parochial ways of connecting to others. To discourage further escalation of intergroup animosities, we need to understand the collective narcissists better, as it's clear they are not going away. And to notice that I have been very, very neutral in my way of explaining this is because we only have to look over the last year or two, or perhaps even the last 5 years, to see in the US specifically of the collective narcissist movement, I'll call it what you will, of some of the conflicts that has been happening out in the streets, specifically in Washington, D.C. and in neighboring cities that have gone out to rally. But really, what is the appeal of the narcissistic leader? But the appeal of the narcissistic leader is also their downfall. From sports field to the battlefield, from business to politics to ineffective leaders often shoulder the blame when things go wrong. And perhaps we should be more careful about who we put in charge. In my research, it is found that your personality and how narcissistic you are is linked to how effective you are as a leader. And I've found that narcissists may appear to be good leaders early on, but they soon fall out of favor. And as we choose the leaders around us, we often think we are making informed choices about who is most effective. But research suggests that this is not always the case. In fact, we are more likely to select as leaders those people who display narcissistic traits. Those who score highly in narcissism tests believe that they are special people who are superior. But they also report high levels of confidence. They are focused on themselves at the expense of others, and they are very, very vain. And these overly positive views of themselves help narcissists to perform very well in situations that offer them an opportunity for personal glory, such as performing under pressure, performing tasks that are difficult, and doing things in the presence of others. But when they perceive that there's no such opportunity, narcissists withdraw their effort and perform poorly. Because narcissists are so focused on personal glory that they can be difficult team members, and yet they might make good leaders. Positions of leadership provide an opportunity to gain glory from others, and so are likely to be attractive to the narcissist. But is the leadership really sinking? There is so much research out there right now that has been researched and written about the idea of narcissists as a concept in terms of leadership. But until now, there's been no evidence of whether or not narcissists actually do make effective leaders in the long term. And over time, narcissistic leadership sinks. And narcissistic leaders are doomed to fail in the end, because they are initially attracted to the narcissist's charisma and vision, which allowed the narcissist to rise as the natural leader. But over a very short time, narcissistic leaders fail to provide the followers with the appropriate levels of challenge or support. And this is why the narcissistic leaderships sink, and it ultimately leads to their downfall. And it actually paints a rather negative picture for narcissists in the long run. It's not all doom and gloom for the narcissistic leader, though. The challenge is for them to be able to harness their charisma and combine it with other factors such as humility or empathy, which should enable them to be seen as effective leaders over time. An extreme narcissist may not care what others think of them, and may be doomed to fail in the leadership role, but there are other narcissism traits that may be more effective and even necessary in some forms of diplomacy, for example, such as narcissistic charm. And being able to choose between leaders who we like in the short term and those who we believe will get the job done and be effective over time is not necessarily an easy task. Dealing with this paradox is vital to be able to ensure effective leadership in the long term. Narcissistic people aren't just full of themselves either. And new research that I recently came across finds that they're more likely to be very, very aggressive and violent. And studies of narcissism and aggression involving many participants in a study that I have come across found narcissism is related to a whopping 21% increase in aggression and 18% increase in violence. Remember that narcissism is defined as entitled self-importance. Aggression is defined as any behavior intended to harm another person who does not want to be harmed, whereas violence is defined as aggression that involves extreme physical harm such as injury or death. And it's been found that individuals high in narcissism are especially aggressive when provoked, but are also equally aggressive when they aren't provoked. And people with high levels of narcissism showed high levels of physical aggression, verbal aggression, spreading gossip, bullying others, and even displacing aggression against innocent bystanders. They attack in both a hot-headed and cold-blooded manner. Narcissism was related to aggression in males and females of all ages from both Western and Eastern countries. So people who think that they are superior seem to have no qualms about attacking others whom they regard as inferior. But why does this all really actually matter? Well, research shows that everyone has some level of narcissism, but some people have higher levels than others. The higher the level of narcissism, the higher level of aggression. People high in narcissism tend to be bad relationship partners, and they also tend to discriminate against others and to be low in empathy. Unfortunately, narcissism is on the rise, and social media might be a contributing factor. Recent research has found people who posted large numbers of selfies on social media developed a 25% rise in narcissistic traits over a 4-month period. And this was done in a 2019 survey by the smartphone company Honor, who found that 85% of people are taking more pictures of themselves than ever before. In recent years, social media has largely evolved from keeping in touch with others to flaunting it for attention. Very important line of work. It investigates how people become narcissistic in the first place. And that goes into what we've been talking about all this time. How parents overvalue, overestimate, and overpraise their child's qualities. Their child tends to become more narcissistic over time. And such parents think their child is more special and entitled to than other children. But they also found that if parents want their child to have healthy self-esteem instead of unhealthy narcissism, they should give unconditional warmth and love to their child. Now, I know that might not be an easy thing since we have working households and we're not always able to be there for our children. But there's always a way. If we stop thinking about how to gratify ourselves, to be there for other people and show that unconditional love and compassion, then things may be a little different and our children won't be brought up into a world where they feel like they are disrespected, abandoned, and dishonored. And that's only just a couple of things that a child could experience in an upbringing. It's not everything, it's just generalization. And then, of course, we went into the link between narcissism and aggression at the individual level. But also, the same link exists at the group level, talking about collective narcissism. My group is superior to your group. Like I said, I'm not going to mention recent events in order to make you understand what I'm talking about. I don't have to label any groups of a particular that first comes to mind. And then this is related to intergroup aggression, especially when one's in-group, us, is threatened by an out-group, them. But my point here is today to give you a meta-analytic review, which is exactly what I do for a living. I combine as a psychology researcher or research scientist, call it what you will. I combine data from multiple studies investigating the same topic to develop a conclusion that is statistically stronger because of the increased number of people involved. And a meta-analytic review can reveal many patterns that aren't obvious to any one study. And doing what I do is like looking at the entire forest rather than the individual trees. That's why when you see my work, it's so extensively detailed, multi-layered, like an onion waiting to be peeled. So with that said, we are going to take a break. You are listening to Soma Fusion Radio with Dr. Katie Kamara on the Soma Fusion Media. For more information, please look me up again on social media or go to my website, soma-fusion.com or somafusionmedia.com, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe out this show and let the whole world know what we're learning each week. Invite them to listen with us. And after the break, we're going to dive deep into the dark triad and toxic relationships that result from narcissism. We'll be right back.
When I was just a girl, I read a magazine. It said, you can have the world if you look pretty. but you'll never be enough. So avoid humiliation and stop looking for love when all you need is validation. So I grew up kind of hating myself and letting all these other people monetize my mental health by making me believe that my personal success was dependent on my weight and the way that I dress. I hate it when you ask me what's your problem. As if you don't already know. I'm a total narcissist. Yeah, that's what my problem is. You're the one that started this, but I'm a total narcissist. I see the same magazine criticize my generation, and I find it kind of weird you'd critique your own creation, but you still go online and call me self-obsessed. Wait, did you forget who made the internet? I hate it when you ask me what's your problem. As if you don't already know. I'm a total narcissist. Yeah, that's what my problem is. You're the one that started this, but I'm a total narcissist. Yeah, that's what my problem is. I'm empathy's arsonist. Yeah, I'm a total You call me apathetic. You put my worth in vanity until I'm depressed and you get upset when all I ever do is talk about me. You sell your dumb cosmetics or setting goals I'll never reach until I'm depressed and you get upset when all I ever do is talk about I'm a total narcissist. Yeah, that's what my problem is. You're the one that started this, but I'm a total narcissist. Yeah, that's what my problem is. You're the one that started this, but I'm a total narcissist. Yeah, that's what my problem is. I'm empathy's arsonist. Yes, I'm a total
Dear mama's boy, I know you've had your butt licked by your mother. I know you've enjoyed all that attention from her, and every woman goes with your presence after. Dear narcissist boy, I know you've never really apologized for anything. I know you've never really taken responsibility. I know you've never really listened to a woman. Dear me show boy, I know you're not really into conflict resolution or seeing both sides of every equation or having an uninterrupted conversation. And any talk of happiness and any talk of connectedness and any talk of resolving this leaves you running for the door. Why do I try to love you? Try to love me when you really don't want me to. Why do I try to love you? Try to love you when you really don't want me to. Dear egotist boy, you never really had to suffer any consequence. You never stayed with anyone longer than 10 minutes. You never understand anyone showing resistance. Dear popular boy, I know you're used to getting everything so easily. A stranger to the concept of reciprocity. People aren't always like you in this society. And any talk of selflessness and any talk of working at this and any talk I'll call you on it. And Danny talk of willingness, and Danny talk of both feet, and Danny talk of commitment leaves you running for the door. Why do I try to change you? Try to tell you when you really don't want me to. Why do I try to change you? Try to change you when you really don't want me to. To the women who will dance the dance, and you go back to your friends who will lick your ass, and you go back to being so oblivious, and you go back to the center of the universe.
Well, you are back. You are listening to Soma Fusion Radio with your host, Dr. Katie Kamara, on Soma Fusion Media. Well, that song was a little revealing, and it really goes into what narcissism is really all about. But let's move on to a much darker topic. And it's one of those topics that we really don't want to know about. However, its prevalence of it is highly needed to be known about, to know the red flags, to know when you come across it, and not only that, to keep yourself safe, because dark triad and the personality that comes with it can be very, very dangerous. And of course, dark triad individuals are very manipulative, entitled, and they do lack empathy. Now, of course, the dark triad sounds like the title of a horror movie or a video game, but it's actually the name for a very, very disturbing mix of malevolent personality traits some people really have. And when we break it down, I'm going to break it down for you. You have everything that you need to know about the dark triad, what it is, what the signs of a dark triad personality are, and why an individual with them can be very, very dangerous. Now, firstly, I've got to explain what the dark triad really is. The term dark triad was coined by two researchers in 2002. It describes a witch's brew of three different but interrelated negative personality types, and you might have heard them. It includes narcissism defined as a feeling of superiority and entitlement, but underneath grandiosity is typically the sense of inadequacy. Then you have Machiavellianism, which is being highly manipulative, willing to deceive others to get what they want, and having a cynical view of the world. And then you have psychopathy, lacking empathy and being emotionally cold, while also being impulsively and prone to taking big risks. Now, central to these types is a person's disregard for others and an obsession with themselves. They lack compassion, empathy, and certainly, most above all, a moral compass. And people with dark triad traits rate high in their willingness to exploit anyone to get ahead. And they experience little remorse when they cause harm to others. And they can also be duplicitous and very, very aggressive. Now, how common are dark triad personalities? It's really, really hard to know exactly how many people fit this description. And since it actually technically isn't an official diagnosis in the DSM-5 or the Psychiatric Bible, the closest that we have to this diagnosis is antisocial personality disorder. And it's often referred to as sociopathy or ASPD, known as a mental disorder. And people who have it repeatedly disregard the rules and ignore the feelings of others. And like those with dark triad traits, they also show an alarming lack of empathy and plenty of hostility and aggression. Now, sadly, dark triad personalities seem to be reasonably common given what is out there and according to the research that has been done by various other studies. And they're often reinforced in our culture too. But how can you really tell if someone has dark triad traits? It can be difficult to recognize a person with dark triad traits because they're charismatic and they're charming and they're masters at flattery and making a person feel like they're special or fortunate to be in the presence of a person of elevated taste, intelligence, and compassion. But people who have dark triad personalities can't sustain this perception forever, and eventually they burn out relationships by exploiting the very people with whom they become close to. And there are plenty of behaviors that can signal someone who has dark triad traits. And one of those traits, so the first one, is an inability to sustain long-term relationships. Now, this doesn't only mean romantic partners, but friends, family, work colleagues. They have a string of unsuccessful relationships where they have cut off significant people in their lives. They also have a history of being a victim in relationships and generally in life. People with dark triad personalities are masters in what there is known as a narcissist cycle of abuse and gaslighting. When they are challenged, they quickly turn the tables and become the victim. They also have inconsistencies in their stories. And while they're pros at manipulating facts for their own benefit, over time, they're unable to sustain the perfect veneer. The so-called facts and background details of their lives are so inconsistent that they don't add up. And the problem is with this is that they are so charming and charismatic that they are leading you to believe. They go down a little rabbit hole and they tell you lots and lots and lots of stories, and you are led to believe them, every single one of them. And because of the charming attitude or trait that they bring on or bring forth through gaslighting, that you really don't actually go ahead, unless you're inclined to do so, you don't go ahead and check the background to these stories to see and discern whether they are true or not. But eventually, once you step out of it, the background details of their lives are extremely inconsistent and they really don't add up. They also have a chronic need to be fulfilled. Individuals with dark triad personalities always have a need to be fulfilled at the expense of anyone and everyone around them. And if you've been in this situation, if you're left feeling depleted emotionally, physically, or even financially, chances are you're being manipulated and used for their personal advantage. Now, some might ask, can you be friends or in a relationship with someone who has a dark triad personality? Me, personally, I've been there, I've done that. I don't even recommend it. And I would suggest to run for the hills. But it's hard to tell what you're getting into when you're up in the stage where you are in love or infatuated with the concept of love. Because you are in a position where you are being fulfilled by everything that is possible to make you happy in the moment. And so you don't look the other way. But can you really be friends or in a relationship or even in business with someone who has a dark triad personality? And let's get real here. Like I said, I don't recommend it. It's dangerous to be in any type of relationship, be it a friendship, an intimate affair, or a business association with someone with a dark triad personality profile. And these individuals are hardwired to exploit, and they will proceed to do so regardless of how much you want them to change, or if you think that they are good people. Like abusive narcissists, they hide themselves. And sure, people with dark triad personality traits may be able to change, but the likelihood of that happening is extremely, extremely minuscule. And personality traits that make up dark triad are deeply ingrained in their psyche. And chances are they've been doing it for many, 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 many years. And they are highly resistant to any sort of challenge that would manifest a change. And so the best strategy is to move away from them as quickly as possible. Run. And if you are in a situation where you're not sure if the individual has dark triad personality, or you simply can't get away, you need to seek help. But again, when understanding the dark triad and understanding how to manage dark personality traits, some people have personality traits that can make it very, very difficult to work with them. And they may be volatile, they may be arrogant, they may be an asshole, or they may be domineering. But with careful management, you can develop their strengths, neutralize the challenging elements of their behavior, and restore harmony. But I'm going to go into some other behaviors and characteristics that can be seriously damaging. And if someone displays a toxic combination of these traits, they can undermine anybody in a very, very psychologically and maybe perhaps physical lasting way, and can potentially poison and destroy another person. And like I said, it sounds sinister. But let us look at how this might impact you and how you can work through it. Now, I will mention that there is an overlap with each characteristic, traits. Now, moreover, all of these traits have often been attributed to what I refer to as people with narcissistic tendencies, and more what others commonly refer to as either narcissists, sociopaths, abusers, psychopaths, manipulators, or just in general toxic people. But this also includes other traits like a sense of entitlement, paranoia, delusion, dependency on admiration and attention. And so it's good to know a little bit more about the actual personality itself. And the 9 dark traits that is associated with the dark triad personality is egoism, an excessive preoccupation with one's own advantage at the expense of others in the community. Machiavellism, an manipulative, callous attitude, and the belief that an ends to justify the means. Moral disengagement, cognitive processing style that allows behaving unethically without feeling distress. And of course, narcissism, an excessive self-absorption, a sense of superiority, and an extreme need for attention from others. Psychological entitlement, a reoccurring belief that one is better than others and deserves better treatment. And psychopathy, a lack of empathy and self-control combined with impulsive behavior. Sadism, a desire to inflict mental or physical harm on others for one's own personal pleasure or one's benefit for themselves. And sadism, unfortunately, in dark triad and also narcissism in general, can go into sex abuse or sexual. There is such a thing called sexual narcissism. Also, you also have toxic self-interest, a desire to further and highlight one's own social and financial status. And not only that, the last one is spitefulness, destructiveness and willingness to cause harm to others, even if one harms oneself in the process. But let us go back to narcissists for 1 second. And I'm going to give you some surprisingly weird things that narcissists do. And again, dark triads, I know that I'm still digressing for a little second, but it's also these personality traits very much overlap. And just by observation, you might see overlapping traits that you may have seen or experienced before. And of course, in the most plainest of ways, narcissists are very unique characters. And one of the things that you will notice about them is that they try and do and say things that will have you scratching your head in total bewilderment. But believe it or not, narcissists gain pleasure from manipulating their victims. And due to the nature of the disorder, some narcissists have a desire to disrupt the emotional well-being of their targets. And therefore, they don't have conversations or behave in certain ways without there being an ulterior motive behind it. And often the aim is to psychologically terrorize their victims. Call it an interrogation, because you don't know what's happening. Basically, everything a narcissist says and does is code for something else, and if you're going to get a better understanding of the person that you are dating or dealing with, you need to read between the lines. So I'm going to give you 12 fascinating, weird things that narcissists do and say what they actually mean. Number 1. They always walk in front of you. You're probably looking at thinking, what? Do you know that most narcissists are capable of being extremely self-centered? As far as they're concerned, they are the most important person in the world. And they view people as an extension of themselves, who are there for the sole purpose of satisfying their wants and needs. Now, much of their behavior will result in the people that they deal with feeling invisible in any type of relationship. And one of the many strange ways they do this is to walk in front of their significant other or the person that they are walking with, especially in public. The narcissist will pick up the speed and walk extremely fast with the intention of losing them. The individual will then go on a frantic search for their partner while they are watching them in panic in the shadows. And when the narcissist decides to show up, they blame the person for being too slow. Number 2. How can I show you the depth of my love for you? A saying like this typically is a part of the love bombing stage or the idealization stage. The narcissist will make the person that they're with feel as if they are the most astonishing and remarkable person in the world. They desperately want the individual to believe this and reinforce it. They will ask what they can do to show how much they love their partner or the person that they're with or dealing with. And it's a very, very effective manipulation tactic with deep psychological implications. So what they're basically saying is that they are willing to do anything for their significant other or the person that they are with, even if it means traveling to the ends of the earth. Number 3, they are obsessed with conspiracy theories. Psychologists from the University of Kent carried out a study and discovered that narcissists are most likely to have an obsession with conspiracy theories. Now, the previous research suggests that endorsement of a conspiracy theory is linked to low self-esteem, which is a common character trait for narcissists. Researchers argue that their love for conspiracy theories may stem from their connection to the malicious actions of any perpetrator. Number 4, there is no couple in the world with such a strong connection as ours. Now again, this could be a connection between two people as a relationship. It could be a connection between as a husband and wife. It could be friends. It could be workplace. Again, this is another saying used during the love bombing stage of any type of relationship. The narcissist's aim is to keep reminding you that you are the most perfect person in the world and the perfect person that you are with. The one and only. And nothing you can do or succeed in life is without them. And this is one of the first things that you'll hear from a potential abuser. And it strongly equates to false hope. Non-stop attention and flattery can be appealing when you have been in a relationship with someone for a very short amount of time. But when they are making such statements after a couple of days, you might want to start thinking twice about the person that you are with. Because during the love bombing stage, they look for empathy. They play victim, they tell you a story and say, poor me, to get you to sympathize with them, show them some empathy. Now they have your attention so that you can continue forward. And then they look like they're the perfect angel. And the love bombing stage is a strategy that a narcissist will use to capture their prey before they realize what's really taken place. Think about it like this. When you are trying to get the lead back on a dog's neck, you would entice him with treats, put on your sweetest voice, and say all the right things to get them to come to you. But as soon as the dog gets close enough, you quickly snap the leash on his collar, and at the beginning of any type of relationship, narcissists will use this very trick and every trick in the book to hook their victims. Because for narcissists, it's all about capturing, hunting. Then they will answer your questions indirectly. A narcissist will never give you a yes or no answer. Instead, they will deflect it because it invalidates the question. Giving a straightforward yes or no answer, or a straightforward answer to anything, or a reply to anything, is an indication that the individual doing the task has been acknowledged and honored as a person, whether they agree with the opinion of that individual or not. But by giving an indirect answer, you are refusing to answer the question and dehumanizing the individual who asked it. Narcissists don't like answering other people's questions. They would rather answer their own, which is why they reframe the question to suit them, and they send an instant message to deflect the conversation. They don't like the question being answered. They change the subject. Number 6. None of my exes were faithful to me. When you can make a person feel guilty, it is easier to control them. Narcissists are the champions at making their victims feel sorry for them. I just spoke about it. If the person that they're dealing with is not acting in a way that pleases them, they will say something along these lines to force the person into a position of submission. And they will make excuses, every excuse under the book, so that you feel sorry for them. They will also dominate conversations. Now, as you know, narcissists have an inflated sense of self-importance. And even though deep down they are terribly insecure, one of the ways this manifests is by dominating conversations. And it's also coined conversational narcissism. Conversation in healthy pretenses is a two-way street, but not a conversation with a narcissist. You won't be able to get a word in edgeways because they keep turning the attention onto themselves. They will interrupt everything that you say and make it all about them. And before you finish the sentence about your day, they will interject and will tell you every last detail about theirs. Try and talk about the amazing skiing trip that you went on. They went on a better one 10 years ago. I can assure you this. And once they have finished speaking, they will abruptly end the conversation because they've achieved their goal. They don't want to listen to you no more. It's not about you. It's about them. Number 8. I know how to destroy you. The cornerstone of the narcissist personality is that they lack empathy. Most of the time, they don't feel good about themselves. They cope with this by projecting their negative feelings onto others. Their survival depends on winning and being right at all costs. And when this is threatened, they automatically go into attack mode. And then they say things like, I know how to destroy you, or I will make your life a living hell. Or they might go to other people that you are close to, your friends, your family members. And they might say something that is totally off about your character. However, their own character gets projected. And they insert that all in there to make another person believe that the person that they are friends with or family members with are completely a bad person. And these hurtful words don't actually mean what they mean. They want to make your life miserable. But they just want you to feel just as bad as they do. The narcissist's inner voice is one of severe criticism, and therefore, to shut that voice out, they will repeat the same destructive messages to their victims. Number 9, they also have a love for totalitarian leaders. And to give you an idea of what that looks like, it might mean, and these are just examples, of course, Pol Pot, Stalin, Mao Zedong, and Adolf Hitler are just a few totalitarian leaders who have been labeled as narcissists. But one thing that is apparent, They desire to have complete control over the citizens of their countries and governments, and they did so by any means necessary, including the imprisonment and the systemic murder of anyone who refused to submit to their authority. Narcissists desire to make a name for themselves, and in most cases, these dictators inflicted such terror on the population they remained in power for several years and are now well-known historical figures. Now, if you find that your narcissistic person has an obsession with Adolf Hitler, say for instance, it's because that they can relate to that person. Take it into modern terms, the fascination with Trump. Narcissists have a love for dominance, and they think that they're better than everybody else and love the idea of wielding their power over the little people. I can give you many, many examples, and some that are inappropriate for the show. But since narcissism is a spectrum disorder, and people like Joseph Stalin were on the high end, in most cases, the person that you are dealing with won't agree with the pillage and murder that takes place with this kind of leadership. So there's no need to worry that they are in agreement with that level of evil. It's the power that these dictators have over others that they admire. Number 10. You are responsible for the downfall of this relationship. Very, very big one that I want to make clear to all of you people. One of the most essential characteristics of a mentally healthy, responsible, and morally centered person is their ability to evaluate themselves and be accountable for their feelings and actions. And this, my dear friends, is how we learn and grow from our mistakes and live a life that lines up with our value system. Most people understand the difference between right or wrong from an early age. However, one of the hallmark or trademarks of narcissistic personality disorder is that they don't take accountability and blame anyone but themselves when things go wrong. If their relationship with anybody, again, multifaceted relationships come in all shapes, sizes, and forms. If any relationship is at breaking point, instead of looking within, they will point the finger at their person that they're with. And you'll go through several stages when, in any type of relationship with a narcissist, a statement like this is typically said during the devalue or discard stage. The devalue stage is when the narcissist starts destroying your self-esteem and confidence by saying nasty things to you. And the aim is to take complete control of your emotional well-being so that you become totally dependent on them. They want you to get to a point where you will do anything for them. And so by saying that you are the person responsible for the downfall of the relationship that you are having with them. And so you'll start doing everything possible to gain their approval. The discard stage is when the narcissist feels they've got everything they can out of you and the relationship that you have with them. And you're no longer useful for them. But let's go back to you will do anything for them. When you're on the opposite end of doing anything for someone that doesn't appreciate anything, please stop. Because nothing you will ever do into a narcissist will be satisfying. Ever. And going back to the discard stage. Again, when a narcissist feels that they have gotten everything they can out of the relationship and you are no longer useful to them, and it may be just because you've run out of money or you are completely exhausted from the abuse that you have endured. And so you have nothing left to give them. No time, no energy, no affection, no attention. And by that time, good chances are that they've already found their next victim, their next feed. Someone they have found, someone they perceive as better. And to ensure they win their imaginary competition in the relationship that they have with you, they will go for total destruction. And during this stage, you will hear the worst of the insults to keep you in a heightened state of distress. And because they are getting ready to walk out, they want to leave you feeling as if your actions are the reason that the relationship with them failed. Because at the end of the day, it's never the fault of the narcissist. Number 11, the silent treatment. Narcissists are well known for their passive-aggressive nature, and the silent treatment is a form of emotional abuse used to display contempt, disapproval, and displeasure. It can be subtle or explicit, and it is always used to subjugate and manipulate the victim into compliance and submission. The silent treatment is a very effective form of abuse because of what is not being said. The person that it is directed towards will focus on what they may have been doing wrong, and this causes great emotional distress. The victim will usually end up accepting the blame and responsibility for the things they have not done. They will apologize and beg and plead for forgiveness while doing that, they will adamantly say to the narcissist that they are the ones that are at fault and they're the ones that need to make the change. While the narcissist is inwardly gloating and enjoying watching the results of emotional trauma they have inflicted, the victim is left feeling bewildered and confused because they are unable to rectify the situation that they did not create. And the silent treatment can go on for hours, for days, weeks, depending on how long the narcissist feels it's necessary to make you suffer. It is a form of control. And number 12, a narcissist might turn around and say, "Is that really how you feel? I'm so sorry." Sorry never means sorry with a narcissist. What they want to say is, let's get past this so I continue my reign of terror without you complaining about it every second. Because honestly, in their brain, they think that you're the one that's nagging. You're the one that's the bitch. Or asshole if you're in the opposite sex. The narcissist has several reasons for being sorry, and none of them has anything to do with holding themselves accountable for their actions and understanding what they have done or said has hurt you. They are typically sorry because you called them out. They got caught, and that you have emotions. So if you're in any type of relationship with a narcissist, these sayings and behaviors are probably all too familiar. And you probably observed and heard them over and over again. And but the good news is, now that you can put them into context, if you're planning on staying with your narcissist partner or friend or workmate, it's important that you shield yourself from the injury of these words and actions that they cause. But if you feel the relationship has become too damaging to you to psychologically, start planning your exit strategy. Build your support network. The reality is that deep down, most narcissists don't want to hurt anyone, and everything they do is a knee-jerk reaction to the intense pain that they feel inside, but they don't know how to navigate. Many narcissists who are abusive in this situation show a lack of resilience, a coping mechanism that they don't have. And so therefore they channel it all by projection, by mirroring, by reacting impulsively. Now I could go into deep information, detailed information about dark triad and narcissism and so on and so forth. But I won't, because I have done many shows about this. We live in a me society. And it's very hard to navigate through a society when it's like that. Many of us avoid responsibility, and we look for alternative ways to look for instant gratification about anything and everything that we do, because many of us live unfulfilled lives. And many of us, not all, but many of us, are in denial about it. And with denial comes delusion. So if you are experiencing any of what has been mentioned on Soma Fusion Radio tonight, you can either reach out to me, you can reach out to your trusted support network. Reach out to a professional, and they can help you through whatever it is that you need to be helped through to get out of these toxic situations. So with that said, you are listening to Soma Fusion Radio with your host, Dr. Katie Kamara, on Soma Fusion Media. For more information, please look me up on social media or go to my website, soma-fusion.com or somafusionmedia.com. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe at this show and let the whole world know what we're learning each week. Invite them to listen with us. And so, with that said, I'm going to be back next week doing another massive show on Is Psychology the Key to Diffusing Politics? And that'll be on the 16th. On the 12th, this Saturday, I'm going to be doing a show at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time with Dr. Margaret Rogers Van Coops, and we're going to be talking all about fear of failure, success, isolation, and integration. On the 23rd, I'm going to be talking again for Soma Fusion Radio. I'm going to be talking about chronocentrism and whether it's getting you into trouble. Of course, you're probably wondering what that is, and you'll find out on the 23rd. There'll be plenty of hints dropped on social media as to what they are. But first, I'm going to leave you with this on this note. Claim your worth. Love is the most expensive gift. Make sure that you don't give it to someone that is cheap. When we take a stand and walk away from any abusive, toxic relationship, we're not just doing it for us. We're doing it for everyone, everywhere. The power that is unleashed when we take a stand and claim our worth and value has a ripple effect. It gives other people who are trapped in similar situations the courage and the strength to do the same. When we say no more, this is not how I'm going to allow someone to treat me. When we take back our hearts, back from the people that hurt us, abused us, belittled us, we create a space to rise up and tap back into our power. When we take that power and we use it to heal ourselves and empower others, things start to shift. And when we live by example and show our children what it means to love yourself first, you create a space for relationships of the future so to be very different. The standards you set catch on. When we join hands as humans and remind one another what we deserve and desire in life as we know it starts to move, shift, and change. You are nobody's emotional or physical punching bag. You are nobody's emotional dumping ground. You are nobody's bitch. You are nobody's beck and call or girl or boy. You are nobody's no good enough when they are lonely, bored, hungry, or horny. You are a fucking god or goddess. You are a queen or king. You are a high-value human. Human. Emphasis. Human. Who deserves to be treated with love, respect, and kindness. I'm all about empowerment and education. So please stay safe. Look out for one another. I love you all. Till next week. Have a beautiful week ahead. Good night.